faculty conversation. We're going to be talking for the next hour. I'll just be talking for a few minutes, but the motivation for this event came from just talking to a lot of our faculty and some concerns about why they do or don't use Twitter. And we have some of our faculty affiliates who really do this well and have a good voice for just talking, leading this conversation. So I'm, as I said, Lynn Dahman, I'm the managing director of the outgoing Center for the Environment and the incoming, whatever comes next, for combining the goals of the environment at Purdue. And I have spent a good amount of time trying to work on Twitter over the last 2 years through the center. And so our goals today are just, I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes to talk about some tips of why particularly early career researchers might want to engage and use Twitter to advance their research goals and even their personal professional goals. And then we'll have a few comments made by 3 of our faculty affiliates or faculty, they're all at Purdue, and can talk a little bit about their engagement with Twitter and lead a conversation. That will be the end of it. So I encourage you to ask questions if you can. This is set up as a Zoom meeting, so anyone can kind of chime in at any time, or also encourage you, you can use the chat to put in any questions you might have. So what I'll be talking about briefly is a couple of the quote unquote top reasons that people might use academic Twitter. And I am really just focusing on academic Twitter. I'm not going to talk about Twitter for politics and for other reasons. And some of the research we have produced can make use of Twitter more efficient. And then some center specific resources that we've developed in the Center for the Environment to further kind of economize the time that you might spend finding information that might be useful for your use of Twitter. So I am taking these 6 categories from a very interesting article called Making Social Media Work for You. And you'll see it's in the Digestive Diseases and Sciences journal. So a lot of NIH articles actually do talk about academic Twitter. I like the way that they articulated the uses of Twitter for particular very academic uses. So branding is obviously anyone who uses Twitter, but a specific focus for faculty and researchers, how it might keep you to staying up to date in your field or in fields that are neighboring yours, network expansion, some educational outreach or advocacy, if that is appropriate for your area of interest. I will not be really talking about how to tweet, but more about motivations and strategies for using Twitter. So the first one is for branding, especially in your early career. It can be useful to use Twitter to get your voice out there. And many of you probably have presence on a website or maybe through LinkedIn or through Orchid ID. So this is another way of creating and curating your brand. And it is a decision if you become active on Twitter, what the relationship is of your work that you present on Twitter versus what you might be presenting in other venues of social media. Many people do actually also have Facebook accounts, but it's not really in the same category as like LinkedIn, for example, for most researchers. So that's why I'm kind of focusing on Twitter and then LinkedIn as a kind of a complement, your Orchid ID as a complement. But for your branding, it is a sense of how you want to present yourself to potential colleagues, potential students, potential collaborators. So I've pulled up some examples that are almost all from Purdue faculty. And we have the bonus prize of actually having Dr. Linda Prokop here today because she is a champion of Twitter. You can see that she has over 3,000 people following her Twitter page, which is pretty impressive. And you can see the way in which she is presenting herself. She has her website, she has a nice picture. She has an image that represents kind of her areas of research interest, who she is. And there's a lot of different varieties of ways of presenting yourself, but this is a pretty standard kind of professional academic presentation. And we also have Dr. Andrew Welton, who also has his URL. You can kind of get a sense of this. So you can see both of these faculty members have very large followers, and some of this can be intentional, and some of this comes from spending a long time engaging with Twitter. So there's definitely strategies that you can think about of ways of really increasing or starting your following, and we'll be talking about a few of those in the next few slides. Also, as I said, like you can see here from the Welton Group, there's a decision to make whether or not your Twitter account represents you or your research group. So one way of thinking about this, we brought up a couple of examples, again, from faculty on campus of 3 kind of research group approaches. So we have the Engelberth research group from Dr. Abby Engelberth and EEE and ABE, and one from David Warsinger, which presents kind of a different angle, and then Marisol Sepulveda's lab in Ecotox lab. So I have to mention, so for example, Dr. Engelberth research group, if you follow this on Twitter, you already have the expectation of it being a research oriented Twitter. And so in some ways that could be good and you develop a brand of your research group, but it could also be a little bit constraining in that you're not going to be too personal. There's an expectation they don't necessarily know if it's Abby who is tweeting in this, using this handle, or if it's someone else in her research group. So some people like the idea of engaging with a particular person instead of somewhat more generic research group. In contrast, so David Warsinger has the Warsinger Lab in his Twitter handle, and he actually tweets quite a bit. So you can get a lot of information not only about the team, but you'll be able to see here, for example, he's promoting publications from his entire group, and he's using a lot of hashtags. So just briefly, in case you're wondering why you would perhaps tag someone, as you see in Sepulveda's group versus hashtag, a hashtag is just general, like searchable term, so that if you put hashtag energy, you'll find a lot of posts that have to do with energy. In contrast to, you see in Sepulveda's lab, at Covenant Point or at Purdue FNR. That means that this tweet will appear on the pages of those 2 at symbols, of those tags. So that a lot of people, I would say, use this balance of using hashtags and tagging people, and also using web URLs. We often go and do a short URL if it's really, really long. And they might also be using pictures, as we see in Dr. Sepulveda's lab. The idea of using pictures, there are statistics that you get like a much larger engagement with people looking at your tweets if you have a picture. So for example, David Warsinger, he's publishing a paper. It doesn't necessarily have to be a picture, but he puts that up there so more people are interested in actually looking at it because it is an image. The other purpose of using this is for research, of course, is that other people might then engage with you and start a discussion. So the nice thing about Twitter in this respect is this isn't information that's being filtered through a journal. It isn't being filtered through an official university account. It's not being filtered through anyone but yourself, basically, within some very wide parameters, so that you have this kind of direct person-to-person or research group to research group discussion, not only about your research, but obviously for larger networking. In addition to that, you can follow an account of someone you admire or whose research you like, and they might follow you back. And if they follow you back, which is kind of a basic courtesy of Twitter, if someone follows you, you follow them back, and then your researcher post then might be on their feed and they might develop further engagement with you. So when faculty ask me, why should I bother? I'm going to talk mostly about this to early career researchers. How can you further develop your research using these basic strategies on Twitter? Another function, again, as I said, that you get a lot of news that is not mediated by anyone else. These are some good examples in the environmental space. So for example, the Indiana Environmental Reporter is like a journalism group out of Indiana University, and they're focused entirely on environmental affairs in the state. So I follow them all the time and I read their articles, and you can see here that they also use that combination of hashtags, and they also use a URL, and there's a photo underneath. So this way, instead of going through Indy Star or Journal and Courier or New York Times, this is to me a complement of that. So I see the news both from, kind of journalism oriented sites. I also am following, as you see here, I can see the news from various colleges and organizations at Purdue, And then we have a nice example of Laura Ingwell posting her picture of these, I don't know, at this colony of Entocady bugs to engage in a kind of a lighter note. Network expansion, as I mentioned before, the idea of following people that you admire and also just expanding that network. And one nice advantage that I've talked to people about that is a little bit, well, first of all, in COVID, we're not seeing people as much face to face. So it can be a way for you to continue to expand your network, even if you are constrained to actually being at a conference. So for example, at AGU, there's a good example here. If you're going to be presenting at a conference that's really big and it's virtual, putting information about your presentation or posting your poster and putting in times and things can help people get to know about your work and attend either virtually or if it's also in person to come see you. Then we have someone like Dr. Siegel. She's not at Purdue, but I liked her tweet saying, if you ever see me, please say hi. So it lowers the barrier in some ways that maybe if you see someone who's very big in your field or someone you admire in person, you might not feel comfortable like interrupting a conversation and introducing yourself, but you might be able to follow them on Twitter and engage with them before that meeting and therefore expand your network. Again, very important for early career researchers. How can we kind of break into some of these conversations? And Twitter can provide that, that approach. So these are just a few different examples, that idea of someone saying, you know, please tweet me, I'm open to meeting, versus when you're going to present, versus also there's lots of job opportunities, scholarship opportunities for both you and your students. So I think that's a very important thing. If you're in a position that you have a group and your mentees or trainees need positions or looking for opportunities, students, particularly undergraduates, do not tend to follow Twitter, but their faculty members might. So it is kind of a way of getting the word out in another direction and another method that not only requires the faculty to be on Twitter, but enables theoretically faculty to know more that they can then push out to their own students. And I think that's a really important feature, because a lot of people don't read emails very carefully, or maybe you're not on the right email list. So this is another kind of public way that you might be able to find opportunities for your students. You'll see every day, you'll see opportunities coming across your academic Twitter. I wanted to talk a little bit, just expose you to some resources. The Purdue resources, they have engineering actually has quite a nice social media toolkit online, and as well as you can see who else is on social media and some templates. So I'm going to go in a second and open these up and also show you some of the resources that we have on our webpage. So I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but I also wanted to show you that another way of engaging is that balance between personal and professional. And I think Linda might talk about this as well, that idea of managing your space. There's a little bit of personal in a lot of people's Twitter feeds. It doesn't go to the extent of Facebook. We usually don't talk about family, celebrations or joys, or, some people do more than others, but well-placed pictures of pets, I think, are always welcome on Twitter. So it's really nice. So when you're in doubt, maybe you don't have anything interesting to say about your research, right? I think there's still like nice ways to engage on your Twitter feed. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to show you there's additional resources, like I said before, for different social media platforms, LinkedIn, Altmetrics, and Orchid. And here there's articles about this as well. And we will post these slides on the C4E webpage and send out information on how to access them to anyone who has signed up. So I'm going to go ahead and look at these. Can people see the templates? Can I see my website?
No, we don't see anything but the slide.
I'm going to go ahead and share and stop sharing. That's usually will help me do this. So I'm going to share the screen again. Okay, so now I think you see my web page. I just wanted to point out these are a few of the resources that Purdue has. Purdue Marketing and Media has really stepped up its game in providing quite a few templates for a variety of things, whether or not they're Twitter posts or poster presentations, everything. So if you've seen some really slick ones on Twitter, the people in charge of the Twitter feed are often coming to here and downloading these templates and then using them. So there's some really nice templates here that you can download and use. Most of these do use InDesign or Photoshop for the templates, but it is, in case you haven't seen this page, I think it's really interesting. There's all these different, different platforms, and then for social media, different media platforms that you can use. So there's Twitter, there's Facebook, there's LinkedIn. So you don't have to worry about having a high level of design skill to use these kind of graphic resources. Then you can see from Purdue, if you're using your Purdue account, you should register it with Purdue, and you can see a lot of the institutional departments, what kinds of social media they have. And you can also figure out what their, what their tag or their handle is for Twitter. So I just want to point out that there is this resource through Purdue. If you are tweeting for a department or as an official account, you should also register your social media with Purdue, not as an individual faculty member. I'm not saying that, but if you are tweeting for a group or department, you can see these are all groups and departments, and you can see what kind of social medias they each have. And then, as I was saying, the Engineering Communications Toolkit. What I like about this is that it gives you a lot of information and training, as well as some, tips and university guidelines. So this is a very useful URL to look at. So I wanted to then briefly look at some of the tools that we have for you to show you. If you look at the Center for the Environment Twitter page, I want to point out that there is this button over here called Lists. And I know one challenge has been, well, if I get on Twitter, it takes me so long, I get, wrapped into it. So what I do when I do get on Twitter, I use these lists. So for example, I curated a list on environmental groups in Indiana. We have a list of affiliates. So anyone who's affiliated with the Center for the Environment, you can go and see what they've tweeted today. And then you can also look at the departments in which our faculty are affiliated. So I often go to the affiliate department. So my feed only shows me what is being tweeted by these particular departments. So there's 45 different departments on this list. So when I scroll, I see what, for example, FNR retweeted. So I see their tweets and their retweets. So I can see what FNR retweeted, and I can go look at Psych Department, FNR, Hort and Landscape Management by one of our speakers, Ariana Torres, and the other items that you can see through here. So this is pretty exciting, just a way that you can filter out and kind of take less time. You can just, scan, as well as if I went to the C4E affiliates list, I can go and then just see what our own colleagues are doing in the environmental space. So this is pretty interesting. We have an application in geospatial science. So there's jobs, there's, different comments and what other people find. Dan Kelly, who is also on the call today. So we can, you'll find lots by Andrew Welton. Here's another. So in 30 seconds, we've seen the 3 people who are on this panel, what they're doing. And in case you want to follow these lists and add them to yours, I'm following it, so I will see it, but there's this follow button and you can follow the list, and you can also make your own list. So I just wanted to point that out. It's something that maybe people don't know about. It's kind of a lesser known feature in Twitter. So before, I'm going to stop sharing and see if anyone has any questions or comments before we hand this over to our 3 faculty members. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Linda Prokop first. As I said, she's has a department of horticulture and landscape architecture. And you could have seen her on her Twitter bio that she is a social scientist as well. And she is now also the lead of the recent very large project on the diverse Corn Belt. I'm going to hand it over to you, Linda.
Thanks, Lynn. And I was looking at the Purdue list of social media accounts, and it's a total mess. So for example, my department is listed under H for Horticulture and Landscape Architecture with a Facebook account, and under Purdue Horticulture and Landscape Architecture with a Twitter account. But nowhere is our Instagram, and just generally a mess. So if you have any responsibilities at a department level, you might want to check that page.
Yeah, that is a good point. That is self-organized and self-updating.
And sure. I had never heard of this page before. So luckily our social media coordinator for the department is here, Pam Fisher. So she will, I'm sure, get that fixed. I just a few points. So I've been on Twitter for several years, starting as a faculty member. And I have found Twitter to be incredibly helpful at disseminating my research. So when I have new papers come out, pushing those out through Twitter, as you saw in one of the examples, I think out of David Worsinger's lab, using a picture. Pictures are incredibly helpful at getting people to stop and read a tweet. And you can tag up to 10 people on a photo or a picture. So it's a way to tag a lot more people than you can tag in a tweet. So that's also a really helpful trick behind pictures. So I've used it a lot to share my research. I also, before I was a department head, I used Twitter a lot to promote a lot of diversity and inclusion activities and efforts, which I do believe was related to my job. I do believe it is the job of every faculty member to promote diversity and inclusion, and to sometimes be critical of administration when that criticism is earned. As a department head, if anybody who followed me before I was a department head and after I was a department head, I have become a lot quieter on the criticizing administration front. It's just a different position and a different role. So I still promote my research, but I also try to promote the research and extension activities going on in my department, usually just by resharing things that the department, that we post on our departmental social media. So you do want to think about what you want your personality to be on Twitter if you're not already on Twitter, if you're thinking about breaking in. I think Lynn's point about personal information is really important. It's not Facebook. And some people do post that personal stuff. I tend to hide those people because I am not on Twitter to see personal information. I'm on Twitter for work. And most people, I think, in academia are. So the occasional personal post is fine. Like my daughter, my oldest, is in Indianapolis today doing some climate strike activity. She'll probably post something about that on social media and I will probably share it. But that's really the extent of the kind of thing I post on social media that's personal. But it's important to think about who you want to be. The bio is really important. Lynn mentioned it's sort of a Twitter courtesy to refollow somebody if they follow you. I only follow if somebody has a bio that resonates with me. A lot of people follow me who don't have any bio. If I don't know the name, I don't bother following back. So you do want to put some thought into your bio and what you want to say on that. People do look at them. And yeah, I think those were the main points I wanted to make. And obviously there'll be a lot more time during discussion. And I don't know, Lynn, who's next, if you want me just to call on Dan because he's unmuted, or
sure, that sounds good.
And then he can call in Ariana.
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, so I may be a little unique here in that so I'm a philosopher. I'm in the CLA, so I don't run a lab or anything, and there's no data to publish or promote. And I think the way a lot of humanitarians and certainly philosophy uses Twitter is probably different. And that there's actually a ton of debate on Twitter, and that spills over into Facebook, and it spills over into other venues as well. So I think of Twitter as one element of an arsenal of sort of consuming information and engagement, where I think with philosophy there's ResearchGate, and then we have our own kind of Facebook thing called Phil Papers, and the professions just sort of sorted out into different pieces of social media are used for different things. And I'm guessing that's all very disciplinary specific. And so figuring how that works for different people is going to be individualized. But maybe one of the things I can, and so the way I mainly use Twitter is I actually don't engage in a lot of the online debate because it can get really chippy really quick. So one general piece of information I would say that I think probably broadly applies is there's a lot of trolls out there, and never feel bad about like blocking or muting with maximum prejudice. Like this, don't let this turn into a time suck, which I was susceptible to at first. Make sure that the medium is working for you in various ways. But I guess one thing that might be useful here is that so I just use Twitter to follow tons of people. So it's mainly a place where I find and consume information. And I'm a philosopher, but I'm very interdisciplinarily oriented. So beyond the way my subdiscipline sort of deals with social media, I find Twitter to be by far and away the most effective way to find out about what's happening across disciplinary spectra, I guess. And one of the things which I found is super helpful is, in addition to the sorts of things Linda and Lynn were talking about, like what the bio is, so I can, sort of like check the credentials of whoever, whatever piece of information I'm thinking about, is when someone publishes a new paper or has a new study, which is either forthcoming or just came out, when they do a sort of Twitter thread, in addition to like, post the picture, and then if I click on the link, I can read the abstract. But a lot of times, even the abstract is pretty technical and disciplinary specific. So if someone does a post and then they do, like 7 or 8 tweets explaining what happens in the paper, but also the wider significance of it, or maybe what the implications might be or future steps, to an audience which is interested but doesn't have the technical jargon or sort of background within the discipline, I found those extremely useful, to the extent that I've sort of gotten plugged into to different pockets of research by finding them out on Twitter first. And given that we're all here for the Center for the Environment, I mean, we know the sort of projects we're engaged in have an enormous interdisciplinary sort of potential to them. So I would just really hammer on that point, do those Twitter threads and speak to a wider audience when you're explaining your research. And that can be super valuable. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ariana.
Hi. You guys can hear me well, I hope. I think for me, I agree with Linda and Daniel on some points. For me, it's about, I've been transitioning, I guess, on Twitter. So when I started, I have a big extension program. So if you guys are familiar with extension, I started my Twitter to push out information for extension. So basically, any workshops, any conferences, any virtual, non-virtual, anything that may happen. And also I used it for my PhD document as an assistant professor. So it was a nice time. It was 2016, and I would hear a lot of older faculty say, well, we don't know anything about social media and we need some metrics. And somebody told me in my college, well, look into your social media and see how can you get some numbers. So that kind of helped me get into tracking things, and also link my extension website to Twitter and kind of make a nice, compelling story about how is Twitter's my website, and how do they complement and kind of present around it, I guess, I would like to say, extension program. And I think after transitioning to associate professor, I think I can relate more to what the previous two speakers were saying. And I try to be very intentional. Like I could spend hours and hours on Twitter because there's so much information, and I just feel like I'm doing a disservice to my position doing so. So I try to filter a lot about who I follow. I do not follow everybody that follows me, because that's going to be on my newsfeed. And then I would spend a lot of time, and because one thought leads to another, and then I didn't do any work. So, and also it can be very overwhelming for me. I am very, it can very lead me to waste a lot of time. Sometimes it's a good time. So I try to be very intentional how much time I'm going to spend and who am I going to engage with, and how do I navigate also what they were saying about the information and the conversations. For me, the most useful conversations in Twitter have been with collaborators. So I have found collaborators, people that do things that are similar, that I'm vaguely interested. And now since I became an associate professor, I'm definitely more interested. So I've been looking and having conversations with people that kind of touch into what I'm interested about. And we're kind of having these conversations about potential projects. So that has been very nice, but that's a more in an internal way. I also engage a lot with the stakeholders that I met through extensions. So for example, I'm collecting data, and there are organizations, so right now we're collecting data on turfgrass buyers, very random topic. So I basically know some people who are managers of organizations that are turfgrass growers and buyers, and they're helping me spread out the little survey that we have. So it has helped a lot, but I'm trying to be very specific and targeted because again, I can spend a lot of time on it, and I don't like to do so. Also, the other thing that I wanted to say was I one of Lynn's points. I do training on social media for businesses, agribusinesses, and a lot of things is I started talking about what is your goal? What do you want to achieve with social media? And really go back to it, because it's really easy to derail and getting overwhelmed and to just spend 2 hours on Twitter, which I could. But try to see, okay, what do I want to do? And it's okay if right now you may be thinking, well, I don't want to use Twitter for content or accessing information, but rather to spread out some new paper. So it's okay to not be on it all the time, because there is this common feeling, if I don't spend an hour every day, I'm not going to know what's going on, I'm going to be irrelevant. That's less important if you know what is your goal in social media and Twitter specifically. And that's pretty much what I kind of had to say.
Thank you to all three of you. And now we'd just like to open it up. If you have questions, probably the easiest thing might be to put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask any questions you might have, or any points that were unclear while we have our great faculty online.
While people are thinking of questions, I'll just share one more thought. I was just looking through a PowerPoint of a talk I did on Twitter a couple of years ago. One way I find good people to follow is when I'm at a conference, and the conference has a hashtag, searching on that hashtag, who else is posting from that conference, is a really nice way to find people with some similar interests. And also, you can retweeting, leading people in your field is also a good way to get followers, and for them to learn who you are. Because if someone retweets you, you tend to look at, who is this person who's retweeted me, and maybe I should follow them. So yeah, those are just some tips. And obviously that's harder in this world of virtual conferences, but I think people are still tweeting that way, and it is a nice way to find people.
So while people are thinking, I'm going to present another question for the three of you that you might comment on. I think this issue of the number of followers and who you're following, and as Ariana was saying, the idea of what your goal is. And I think maybe for some people, it seems a little bit weird to have this goal necessarily of followers, but do any of you want to comment on that kind of issue as a number? I think Ariana was talking about for P&T, number, and sometimes you look at someone's profile and you'll see that they're clearly new on Twitter. You might look more on their bio before you follow them back. But do any of you want to comment on that notion of having an intentional goal of following a certain number of people or having a certain number of followers, and what that might mean in a positive way for someone who's an early career researcher?
I guess I can speak to this. So the sort of professional persona interaction that happens online, I actually do that in other venues. And so for me, Twitter is almost, I'm not quite lurking, but I'm pretty close to lurking. And I follow, I'm at 5,000 follows, and I can't do more until I get a blue check, and I'm not going to get a blue check. But I don't make any sort of effort to read everything that ever goes through there. What I do is I sort of let the algorithm surface stuff which it's sort of figured out that I'm interested in, that a lot of other people are reacting to. And so part of that is who I follow, but also part of it is like what I retweet or what I like. So you can be active in sculpting what bubbles up on your timeline. And it's a way that I don't miss a lot of things, and I get exposed to a lot of viewpoints, you know, of what's happening in the news or in some subsection of academia, which I find very valuable. But again, if something keeps coming up which I don't find valuable, I'll unfollow people or I'll stop liking something. But again, it's much more of it's not an even two-way interaction of information there. So I'm not trying to get more follows or anything.
I think the goal can change, but right. Sorry, Sarah's trying to tell me something on my computer. I think the goal can change. I think for me right now, being intentional is to understand what kind of information I want to access. So talking a little bit about what Dan was saying, I'm also following a lot of writers and editorial people who do editorials in newspapers, just to understand what's relevant outside. No, it's not only research for me. So what information can be interdisciplinary that may touch on my interests? I think I also I don't care about the follower number. And I don't follow a lot of people because I try to see who I want to be on my newsfeed. I want to filter that through the people that I follow. But I do follow people that I'm interested. And one of the things that I do, that the strategy that I started doing, is if I'm going to a conference, I actually try to see what Linda was saying, is try to see, especially since COVID, is try to see who's going to attend that conference, or try to see the topics. And I try to actually follow that people that are going to attend the conference, so that I know that I'm part of the lineup or the program. And I try to either understand what kind of things they're interested about. So if I have a chance to interact online, especially online, and I try to follow up with questions, I already know that person and they kind of know that I've been following. So before COVID, what I used to do is I try to make a list of the 3 people that I wanted to meet at that conference. Since we don't have the conference in person, I do that virtually. So Twitter has been replacing that. And again, that's an example of how intentional I try to be about Twitter, because again, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. And I wanted to really serve my purpose, which has changed again since I became an associate professor. And there is a question somewhere.
So I've never paid attention to how many people I'm following, but I have tried to cultivate additional follows. I believe I bought a beer for the graduate student who was my 100th follower many years ago at the rural sociology meetings in Madison, Wisconsin. So yeah, I have tried to, and partly I do that because, well, I suppose when I'm disseminating my research, which at this point is mostly my grad students and postdocs research, primarily, like I want that to be seen, right? And so the more people who are following me, the more people know that. Lynn mentioned a new big project we have where we're trying to reach farmers across the Midwest interested in diversification. And the more farmers who follow me, the more likely when I share something about that project, people will see it. They might know a friend who's interested in something, they might mention it. So, so yeah, I have tried to, and part of that somewhat intentional with who I tag when I'm doing certain tweets. So yeah, but I mean, you obviously can't make people follow you unless you're going to buy them beer, like I did for my 100th follower. But you can be strategic in the types of things that you post, and then not posting things that just annoy people, right? So like Wordle, for example, you know, like now, like half my Twitter feed is full of Wordle, and like if people keep posting Wordle every day and they're not posting anything else, I might start having to stop. I might have to stop following them, right? Because that's just cluttery and annoying, and that's not why I'm on Twitter.
I also wanted to point out what Linda was saying. She just mentioned that the idea of like, there's a Twitter feed for her new project, Diverse Corn. And then there's also the Linda Prokop Twitter feed. So it's a good example. Like, so Linda has so many followers. If I get Linda to retweet one of my tweets, I'm happy because it's being seen potentially by thousands more people than just if I just tweet something. So there's that idea of like kind of the power of the retweet. But obviously, if someone went to the Diverse Corn page, they're going to expect almost everything to be about that project versus, you know, Linda and her various hats as, you know, head of department, as individual faculty, et cetera. So I think that that's a really good example of that kind of balance. And then there was a question about strategies and tips for PhD candidates who are, you know, will be on the job market soon. And yeah, even on Facebook, the Wordle posts are getting a little ridiculous because I don't Wordle, I do spelling bee. So, and if you have any specific strategies, and I also wanted to point out in the chat that we also have on board today, Zach Shoup, who is the digital content specialist for research communications in the EVPRP. So he watches and spends a lot of time on Twitter looking for things to promote. And obviously, just as a plug, Center for the Environment and the upcoming Institute for Climate, Environment, and Sustainability, we often try to promote our faculty. So to kind of retweet and echo that, that work. So I'm going to ask you three if you want to briefly comment any particular tips you have for PhD candidates, and then I'm going to call on you, Zach, to see if you just want to say hello after that, so you can kind of make your own pitch.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to Elizabeth's question on PhD candidates. You do want to be careful what you share, and you don't want to complain about the academy, right? I interviewed someone for a position and didn't end up hiring them, but then I realized I was already following them on Twitter because they obviously followed me at some point and had a good bio, and I followed them back. And I do try to follow grad students back because I think that, you know, that's grad students need to follow. And so if they have a good bio, I'll follow them back. And then that person's tweets started really jumping out at me, and there was a lot of complaining of, yeah, I sent in a paper and I got a review back, and reviewer 2 is an idiot and blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, I don't really want that person in my research group, right? So you want to, it's very easy to fall into that trap of complaining, right? Or just, you know, it's sort of conversational, right? It's a little bit, I got to revise and resubmit back. I want to tell people, but you could just tell people that without complaining about one of the reviewers. So trying to just be aware that potential employers may very well be looking at your tweet when you're doing it, and or they'll search for you on Twitter if they're interested in hiring you, and they will see what you have tweeted. So being pretty focused on tweeting things related to your work or your you know, passions that are related to work, I think is appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I'd sort of definitely endorse what Linda just said about not getting pulled. I mean, it's an easy place to grouse and sort of get pulled into centers of gravity, which are just a lot of complaining about things. And that's not, I mean, I'll also be upfront, we're doing job search right now, and that's an important decision that we have to make. And I want to have an informed opinion about someone that we may hire. And so, of course, I'd look at their online presence. And that includes, first and foremost, their web page. I mean, so I'm also our DGS. So I tell our grad students, it's pretty common these days. It's anomalous if someone doesn't have their own web page. I don't think it's terrible, but it's certainly at this point anomalous. And a lot of times they'll have Twitter, you know, their handle on there, and then that's also extremely professional. So if it's linked into their professional persona that they're putting forward, yeah, so don't complain, sort of, I mean, you know, you can complain every now and then, but don't just complain. But that would be a place where you should be bound by all the professional norms that you should have been learning while you're a grad student, which doesn't mean you can't have like a burner account where you just talk to your own friends and like bitch about everything like you do at the bar afterwards. But that shouldn't, you know, part of what Twitter does is it removes context, and it allows us to, it puts up barriers to contextualizing that we often have in real life because it's geographic. So just be extremely aware of that. You know, Twitter's also, when used well, it's a good place to sort of find your tribe, like find other people out there who you wouldn't have known otherwise, who are doing interesting research. I know several philosophers who've sort of met having conversations online, and then that's turned into collaborations. I know a couple of people who swear that they're being constantly engaged on issues, including on issues having to do with diversity and inclusion, on their Twitter feed and their social media, sort of help them get a job. I'm skeptical about that because they also had a kick-ass research portfolio. We don't have access to the counterfactuals, but you know, talking to her, she was very much like, no, it came up in the job, the sort of on-campus interview. So I think it can be done well and provide value and sort of increase your odds of doing well in the job market. I think the potential for it being done poorly is maybe much larger. One misstep can have a lot of bad outcomes. And so the first principle is just, you know, first do no harm. When in doubt, just don't tweet. Just like.
I think I've seen it's easier to find on Twitter who are the advocates for job positions. If you're trying to find a job or if you're trying to change a job, it's easy to find people who are, depending on your algorithm, of course, and who you follow, but it's easier to find people who are posting about jobs. When I started my position, most of the algorithm the outcome of the algorithms was I was getting a lot of shares of positions that were available. So as long as you, again, are kind of a little bit intentional about who are the people who are doing that, because there's a lot of faculty or other staff members who may be sharing positions are available, you're going to be able to filter those. I want to second what Dan was saying about when in doubt, please don't tweet, because you would be surprised how much people are trying to hire. Industry is even more aggressive on this. So I think in academia, it's like, okay, well, reviewer two, we always deal with them. But I think in industry, in industry, they're more aggressive looking into your social media profiles and see and putting you into boxes. I have a friend who does research on exactly that. What are companies looking into your social media when they're trying to hire you? And it's surprising. It was surprising to me to see that information. So personal stuff, try to keep it minimal, but again, try to show a little bit of your personality, but not too much. If you're having a bad day, just look for your friends. Because it's going to be always safer than going on your social media and rant about some colleague or some boss, I would say.
Great. This is really good feedback. Thank you. And hopefully that helped address Elizabeth's question. And I think it also brought up to me another thought about when you're starting, what are some things that you want from your different social media kind of presence? So, you know, what I've seen and for some people, it's a lot easier to update information about your research at the expense of your website. You know what I mean? It's a lot easier. You don't have to update. You don't have to have control. If you don't have someone that's their job, if that's their job to manage the website, that's great. But I think it's an interesting thing. It's just that, you know, what are you going to use LinkedIn for versus your website or versus Twitter? It is something to be intentional about, because obviously it takes a lot of time. So what's kind of the best use of your time and how immediate you want feedback to be. Another thing about the grousing, so to speak, I think what is another nice feature of Twitter that I've seen for faculty, if for example, COVID, you have no idea what other universities are putting out for policies of like sick leave for COVID or parental leave for COVID. You can put that out on Twitter and you can very quickly either find or get responses about what's happening in small colleges, large colleges across the world, that you can get information in a very quick and unfiltered way by putting out a question that touches on something that's important. And I think that could be really valid for lots of different things. Someone mentioned about diversity and inclusion. There's lots of kind of just constantly updating topics that is often very hard to figure out what our colleagues at other locations are experiencing. So that's not a grouse, but it can be a very powerful kind of just information builder. Okay, Zach, I'm going to give you an opportunity to plug. Are you still here? There you go.
I am. Yeah. No, first off, thanks very much for putting this on. This has even been really useful for me as well. And then thanks for letting me give my little plug here from the university. But my name's Zach Shoup. I'm the digital content specialist for research communication in the office of the executive vice president for research and partnerships. But part of my job is to, be an asset to you guys and help you promote your research. So anytime that there's a paper published, or anytime you're maybe in the field or attending a conference, if you want to put some of that content on Twitter and tag us at our Twitter handle is @research_Purdue. I'm in there every day. So as soon as I see it, whenever it fits into our social calendar, I'll give you a retweet. A lot of times when things are posted in Purdue Today and Purdue Newsroom, we'll run specific posts on that. So, I really just want to be an asset to help you guys put more eyeballs on your research and help kind of expand that audience. So when in doubt, just go ahead and give us a shout out. If there's something that you want to talk through, see how best we can utilize it online, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. Just shoot me an email. My email is shoupz@purdue.edu. I put it there in the chat a little ways up. So look forward to working with y'all.
Great, thanks, Zach. Okay, I don't see any other new questions out there, so I don't want to spend any more of your time, but just to let you all know that both the resources and the video, this recording will be up online. So if you know folks who didn't get a chance to see it, we will have that up there. And moving forward, as I said, as we transition into a new format, a new name, this will still be a consistent place that you'll be able to go to, and we'll make sure that you get the information. And if you have any other questions to any of our speakers, you can tweet them or reach out to us. Any final comments from our speakers?
No, I'll just say it's just really funny because I was just looking on Twitter and both Ariana and Dan just tweeted in the last 5 minutes. So basically, we're all on Twitter all the time. So if you want to reach us, that's clearly how.
I also wanted to say something about the images. So depending on the time of the day and the platform, you may get up to 50% more engagement when you add a little image or short video. If you're gonna add a video, don't go over 10 seconds. That's too long for Twitter. So a couple of points there.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, you can find statistics on the best time of day, the best day of the week, and all those things online. I'm just going to put in the chat. If you're looking for kind of free images, one source that I like to use, I mean, obviously giving credit to whoever took the picture, but I often go to unsplash.com. And, they have some basic images of things that you can, use as well. Well, thank you all very much for your time, and maybe we'll see you in the Twitter sphere sometime soon.